And we're live. Hey there. A big shout out to Crafty Games 27. Good. I saw your comment already. Practice time before the stream. Awesome. So I hope you have some time to practice after the stream too. So today, of course, I'm going to answer any of your questions about the All-State Etudes or any other technical questions you might have. Let me turn this so the window doesn't shine. But I also would like to go over some of my favorite apps and those little devices and tech gadgets that I like to use. I'm really not a very savvy tech person, but some of this technology is so helpful in practicing and performance. So I'll start with the biggest one. If you are my student, whether at UTRGV or my private studio, you know that I love using iPad. I basically switched to this about a couple of years ago, and I never want to go back to paper music. I mean, I use paper music sometimes, but I love using iPad. Now, this is not a paid advertising. I'm just sharing with you. It has a lot of different features. The reason actually I switched to it because I'm not very organized when it comes to keeping track of my music. And also I've been moving out during my life so many times from different countries to different cities. And so I just would tend to lose all of my music during the moves. And then also, if you've played, for example, chamber music, you play with your friends, you order this very expensive piece of music, you give out the parts, and then inevitably someone forgets to return a part, or you lose your part, and then next time you play this Brahms trio, you go back to your library and lo and behold, there's like a couple of parts missing, so you have to order it all over again. So, and of course that was like pre-flood age when we didn't have IMSLP, we didn't have internet. So when I started using iPad, I was blown away by the fact that all of my library is in this. So I don't have to drag my computer, and I can also at some point, I also had service in it. So anywhere, even if there was no Wi-Fi, I could turn on, service, and I could download any piece of music I wanted from my IMSLP, as long as it's not, copyrighted. Well, and the particular app that I use is called a Fourscore. Let me show you what it looks like. Again, I'm not getting paid for this. I just wanted to share with you guys. You see that little blue icon right there? That's a Fourscore. It costs, when I got it, it was like about $10, but it's, what I love about it, again, it's only one time you pay. You don't have to pay a monthly fee. Right now it's a little bit more expensive, but it does everything, especially if you pair it up with the Apple Pencil, or you can use your just regular, you can use your finger actually, and you can use, what is it called? Stylus. But of course, Apple Pencil makes it just like pen and paper. So I play with it, and let me grab this real quick. It has, forgot to bring it. So I also pair it up with that app, with that page turner, and basically what it does, let me show you. It's so cool. So here are, for example, my scales. I'm going to turn this on. Let me know if you have any questions. So I have this, if you can see. So here's my music. And then when I step on this, see, it turns pages. You step on the right one, it goes right. You step on the left one, it goes back left. Excuse me, that's my alarm telling me that we need to start the broadcast of the library. So I love this because I play with it all the time. You need a Bluetooth enabled thing. So anyway, it works really great, especially when you're playing chamber music where there's so many page turns and sometimes they're so uncomfortable. I play most of the solo literature, I play from memory, but with chamber music, and again, it takes a lot of time to fix your music. If you have a chamber music performance, you want to make sure that your pages are, page turns are in the right place. Sometimes you have to copy over and over, paste and all that. So with this app, And with iPad, it's amazing. You don't have to do anything. But the best part, again, once I put my bowings, I can use different colors with the Apple Pencil to mark the bowings, mark the fingerings. And that is really great. You can also white out things. And so basically, you know how if you Xerox a piece of music that already had someone's bowings on it, you know how hard it is because it gets really, really dirty, and you can't really erase the old bowings if you want to change them. So with this, if you scan a piece of music in it, and if it had someone else's bowings and fingerings, you can actually take a white out and just white it out, and it looks like a completely fresh and new. So, and then if you want those back, you just erase the white out and it's back to its original form. So I really love that. I edit music too, and so I love using that. My other really, really favorite app that I use, and again, my students will know, it's a tuner. It's called TE Tuner. It's that little. Can you see this one? I'll ask Danny to put links to that. And so what it does, I love this app because not only it has metronome, it also has a tuner right there. Yeah, there it is. And I wanted to say something about tuning because this is something that startles me a lot, and my students know that when I have a new student come to my lesson, and when I ask them to tune, a lot of times they would pull out this thing that makes no sound whatsoever, and you kind of play into it, and it just goes like this or whatever, shows you whether you're in tune or not. This really drives me nuts when people use those. Now, there are cases when they're very useful. If you're maybe tuning, like if you're an orchestra director, you have to tune 50 kids, you know, in 2 minutes, obviously that works really well. But, or if you're in a very noisy room and you really need to tune very, very quickly. But other than that, you should always use, and this is the app that will, I mean, it has that feature where it will show you whether you're in tune or not, but the most important thing is that it will play that A for you. It also, what I love, if you see, I have right there, you can choose which instrument gives you an A, and I love the oboe. Another problem that I have with those, some of the tuners is that the sound that you get, you see this sound, if you listen to it, you see, it's very focused and it doesn't have a vibrato in it. So that is the perfect sound to tune to. And, you know, it mimics oboe perfectly. And if you've played in the orchestra, you know that is traditionally, in the full symphony orchestra, the oboe is the instrument that gives everyone the A. And there's a reason for that, because the sound of oboe is very focused. And so it's very easy to hear if you're in tune, if you're out of tune. It's very easy to hear whether you're higher or lower. And so those are the kind of things that are very important. Another thing that you can do with this app, it's like ridiculous. You can, there are two actually ways to tune. There's equal temperament, and there's, you see, it explains, and then there's a just temperament. So these are different ways of tuning. Of course, you want to do an equal. And I would say this app is really, it's only $3, 3 something, but it's really worth it. Plus, like I said, you also have a metronome. A metronome is just like, it doesn't have a lot of fancy features, but you can make it click. You can make it click the first beat for you, switch between eighth notes and quarters and so forth. So one of the things that's important about tuning, and if you haven't done it yet, make sure that before when it's your private personal practice, before you start practicing, make sure turn on, I mean, if you have any other way of getting an A, 440A in the US, it's traditional. Make sure you do that. Hear the sound and teach yourself how to match that sound. Fine tuners are great if you're, you know, if your violin is anywhere under $5,000 in value, it's totally fine to put fine tuners or to put one of those tailpieces that have 4 fine tuners in it. It's not gonna mess with your sound, especially there are some really high quality fine tuners that are very small, but at least have a fine tuner on your A and E for sure. And you can add one. D and G are a little bit easier to tune, but the problem with not tuning with your ear is that you're leaving the most important feeling, the most important sense, your sense of hearing, out of equation at the very beginning of the practice, and you really don't want to do that. So so if you haven't done so before, I encourage you to really start tuning before your practice to an actual sound, and teach yourself how to tune, you know, each. You can just play each string separately for yourself if you're not used to that. But then after a while, once you're getting used to hearing and changing the pitch of your string, you know, according to what you hear, then you can start actually playing 2 strings together and see if you hear that they're in tune. You know, they will start sounding very, very smooth, and there will be no beating. So these are just a couple of things that I like using. I also, one of the things that I do also with the iPencil and iPad Pro, apart from playing on stage, I love that with iPencil, you know, if you have a traditional paper music, you only use soft, like plain pencil, because you want to erase the markings. You will probably want to erase the markings at some point. And so what I love about iPad and iPencil, I actually do that sometimes in the lessons. Like every week, I would change a color of markings. And so my student, and you can do it in your practice, for example, if this week you have certain goals, you can use like red ink, for example, and on iPad, red color, and mark it and put a date in red. So, you know, like, I don't know, January 27th, this week I had these goals. And then when you start practicing, you go straight to where the red marking is, so that you kind of shrink your time of thinking of what to practice. And then as you do that next week, see if you have done well. If you've accomplished all those goals, then go to different ones and mark them different colors. But if there's some that you still need to work, you would circle them with a new color, and that you would go first to practice that. So it really is great. It works really great with students. Some of my students, I do that. And when they go home, they know exactly what to practice, right? They don't have to rack their brain. So I'd like you guys to share right now in the feed, if you have a favorite app or a gadget or a device that you use that helps you to practice and that helps you to perform. I would really love to know that. And go ahead and share with everyone, or if you have any questions about anything else, I would love to answer. So let's go to Fiorillo today. Just start with Fiorillo. And one of the things that I do, I want to share with you some of the like little hacks as far as exercises. I like to hear the harmonies when I play a melody. When it comes to intonation, I always hear, when it's tonal music, I always imagine with my hearing what the harmony would be. It kind of happens naturally. And that helps me to hear the harmony in context. It's sort of like, you know, if you've been to a spelling bee and you need to spell a word, a lot of times a contestant would ask, can you give it to me in a sentence, please? Because sometimes it's easier to recall the word in a context, or this word could mean different things. So you want to make sure, and sometimes the spelling would vary, right? Depending on the different word. And so, you know how they would ask, could you please give me a sentence? Well, it works the same when you work in your intonation, and that's the hard thing about playing violin, because it's basically a monophonic instrument, right? If you know what monophonic is, please mention in the comment. I would like to see how you would define that. And so when we play, we usually don't have the harmony accompanying us unless we have a pianist sitting right there, right? And that makes it much harder to hear whether we're playing in tune or not. So this is why I did that accompaniment. If you've seen my Fiorillo 8, I posted it a couple of days ago. But I had so much fun actually writing down that accompaniment and playing along with it. So I want to explain to you what I did there. Number one, if you listen to the first line, so the bass line, so I played both lines, the violin part and the bass line. So the bass line will give you, will actually subdivide some of the beats into 2/8 notes. And that way, when you start, that's 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1. See, that makes it much easier for you to keep track of time. So I would recommend, highly recommend that you go check it out. If you, especially if you're like me, I hate counting. I do not like counting. I love the rhythms. I love performing the rhythm. Of course, I do count when I learn the piece. You have to. There's no way around it while you're learning. But I really like to find ways to avoid just counting long notes when I practice. And of course, turning on the metronome helps that a lot, because metronome kind of counts for yourself. But I love when you have accompaniment, it makes things just so much more fun. And so that's what I did. I composed this accompaniment, and the two things that you can see from there, I subdivided the beats for you. And also I gave you the harmonies, especially the diminished harmonies. All those measures where you have descending diminished harmonies, it makes it much easier to follow and to hear them. So as you're practicing, please check it out and let me know what you think. So now let's look at, I wanted to show you what I do with fingerings actually in measure 12 and 13. The fingerings, there are two sets of fingerings, and I prefer the one on the bottom, and I will explain to you why. Let me grab my bowl. So, so it starts this one. See, so there are two ways to play it. You can play B natural with the second finger. Or you could play with the third finger. And I prefer the third finger because I kind of make second finger, this F, as my kind of anchor finger. So that this way I know exactly where to land my B natural on D string and where to land my A flat. So here's that F. You see, I'm going to hold on to it as I stretch the D, because then I know that my B natural will go right on top of that. See that? So, and I use that same fingering later on. There's a couple of measures that are exactly the same. I hope you realize that. So they're just one step higher. And the second finger works really well. So if that works for you, that's fine. But if by any chance maybe you're having a hard time nailing those notes exactly in tune, try that. They're both there. That's the fingering that's on the bottom in parentheses in Galamian's version. Try that. I really prefer that because it makes my hand stay in exactly the same place, and I have to stretch and squeeze. Now, one of the things that is very important, because it has that diminished arpeggio, descending arpeggio, make sure that you practice your arpeggios, your scales and arpeggios. So basically every scale, if you have a scale book of any kind that has scales and arpeggios in it, you will see that the scale is when you play everything, well, every note in a row. Some sometimes they add a few notes at the beginning and at the end just to, just to make it even, so you can divide it in fourths, right? But arpeggios will be usually the next thing in that start with the same sound as you start your scale. And in some books, it's only one or two. It would be in G, it would be minor arpeggio and major, right? Well, what you need to find a scale book that has 7 kinds of arpeggios in each scale. And if you have Carl Flesch, and last time let me make sure I know how to spell it correctly. Flesch. Well, so I think this is how, so it's, if you go on IMSLP, it's either that or, no, I think it's just SH. So if you just look for Carl Flesch scales, you will have, you will be able to find them on IMSLP, and you will have those 7 kinds of arpeggios. And the kind you want is the number 6. It's a diminished chord, and that's the one that's used here. Okay, we got a question for Crafty Games 27. What does restes mean in the descending scale, measure 13? Wonderful question. I love that question. I love that you're paying attention, first of all, to all of those comments. That is so important. Restes, I hope I pronounce it right. It's a French word. It means stay. So that means stay in the position. And sometimes you'll have it in English and it'll just say stay. And sometimes it'll say originally in French, reste. So basically what it means, you see those fingerings there. They want to make sure that you don't shift down. So you see, as you're going down, as the melody moves down, you don't shift down the position, you just go to the next string down. Wonderful question. And the same is true for the next, for measure 19, where now you're in D minor, and it's the same. You want to stay in that position, okay? So that's a very actually international term. Everybody uses it. How about, let's see, if you have the place that is the hardest for you, you can, why don't you share with us? I would love to hear from you what you think is the hardest. But going back to arpeggios, so when you find, if you have any scale book that will give you 7 kinds of arpeggios, then one before last will be the diminished chord, and that is what is used in measures 13, and then in measures 19. And so basically the way it's composed, the way it's made, it's all minor thirds. So if you start on G, it'll give you, sounds exactly, and that's actually the exact arpeggio that is used in measure 19. And then the one before that I just played in measure 13, you will probably find it, let me see, I have all these robocalls. You will probably find it in another scale that starts, probably if you go to B major, I know the scale is really scary, but if you go to B major, you will have, you will find the chord that starts with the B natural that you have in measure 13. You don't have to do anything else, you can just find that one. Or if you play F major, you will, if you start on F, you will get the same exact chord. that would be a very useful exercise. If you're thinking what kind of scale routine you should be practicing as you're getting ready for Allstate, considering this etude, definitely practice arpeggios that have those diminished chords in them. Now, the tricky part about the diminished chord is, as I mentioned, because you basically start on a note and then you add a minor third on top of the next note and so forth. Because of that interval of minor third, any position that you're playing, you're going to be constantly either stretching or squeezing. And as you move between the strings, you hardly ever move your finger to the same place. You're going to have to either travel down or up. And so you are constantly moving up and down within each position. And that is what makes it so difficult. Another thing that's weird about this chord, if you just listen, and I love this, actually you hear it a lot in Bach, right? It's so awesome. It sounds very ominous and scary. And believe it or not, actually, Bach almost got in trouble a couple of times for using, and composers during Baroque time, especially earlier Baroque time, the church really did not want to hear those kind of chords because they actually had, if you skip a note, you play the first note of the chord, skip the second and play the third, you get a tritone. And that was considered the devil's interval because it sounds so unpleasant. And because of tritones, that's what makes it hard to hear even. How do you hear if this is a tune or not, right? Because it's very dissonant. Well, this is why it's so important. Remember what I said at the beginning, harmonic context. And so when you get to this part, what I did in that accompaniment that I just posted with Fiorella, I gave you actually this chord right as you start that long F. That's measure 11. You will hear this in accompaniment. You see? So hearing that accompaniment, that harmony in the piano accompaniment is going to make it so clear for you. You will hear that harmony right away because you hear it all the time in music. The problem is you mostly hear it in pieces that have piano accompaniment or are written for instruments that can carry a lot of harmony, and violin cannot. By the way, I'm bringing back the question. I'm just really curious if anyone can comment if you know what I mentioned before, that violin is technically is mostly monophonic instrument, and if you know what monophonic is, please comment. And also if there are any kind of favorite gadgets that you have in that you use during practice or performance. And going back to that, this app that I mentioned at the beginning, it's called TE Tuner. TE stands for Tonal Energy Tuner. And again, I'm not getting paid for anything. My channel's way too small. By the way, I finally got to 300. I'm up to 301. So shout out to all of you guys who joined recently because I finally got over 300 subs mark. Yay. So anyway, here is that Tonal Energy app that has a lot of things. So I mostly use it for the metronome and for the tuner. So here's the tuner. The cool thing that this tuner does that a lot don't is that you can basically dial as many sounds as you want at once. And you see that button that says sustain. So you click there. And if you are not sure, if you don't have a piano or a keyboard, or if you want to play that chord as you're practicing, all you have to do, hit sustain. And so let's dial the chord, for example, the notes in 13. So it has, so you hit, let me see. So here it is, B natural, then D. You see? As long as I hit sustain, it'll hold all of those notes. And I know it sounds really scary, but if you have a hard time hearing that harmony in your mind and you forget what it's supposed to sound like, you could just use that. And if you hold it for a little bit and try to fit every sound into that, that's amazing, because it will really tune your ears into that chord. So that's one of the things, like I said, I really love about that tonal energy tuner, because it does that. Very few tuners will do that. Another thing it'll do, there's actually a part of that app. You can actually record whatever, for example, you can play with that little wheel of sounds, and it will record it, and then you can press a button and it'll just keep looping it and playing back to you. The same thing you can do on iPad. On iPad, the awesome thing is that the recording feature on that ForScore app, so basically you open up your score and then you go to record. It will not only will keep that every time you open the score, all of your recordings will be there, but you can also change the tempo of the recording without changing the intonation, which is awesome. So anyway, so I hope that makes it easy. Now, next, to save yourself time, again, if you practice measure 12 and 13 correctly, then when you skip to measures 18 and 19, you can so you can basically do exactly the same thing, only a step up. Okay, hi Maria. Maria Josh is saying, I believe monophonic instruments can only produce one note at a time, or one straight melody with no accompaniment. Yes, absolutely. So monophonic exactly comes from the word mono, and so mono means one, and phonic is a form of Greek word sound. So basically, yes, violin, as we know, even though we can occasionally play double stops and chords, but it's mostly monophonic instrument. Thank you, Maria. Awesome job. Awesome answer. And that is why anytime you can create a harmony to go along with what you're playing as a single line, it's going to help you tremendously. It just will develop your ears. And if you have theory or harmony that is taught in your school, or there's a website that I love, I will actually post here. Oh, here is actually, I never posted this comment. Sorry about Carl Flesch scales. But I love this particular website, teoria.com. Here it is. This is the funnest website to go to and learn some theory to put together with your playing. Okay, Maria Ochoa, I don't use any apps besides a metronome and a drone app. However, I do use a journal and a planner to list all the tasks I have to complete or deadlines I have to meet. That is fantastic. I love that. Journals and planners are great. If you are the kind of person that will keep that, that is really, really phenomenal. I'm really bad at keeping journals. So my music, but I sort of do, because I basically do that all in my music. Like I write on my music what I want to do, but that is really phenomenal. And that reminded me of one more actually app I wanted to show you. And it's sort of like that. It sort of helps you keep track of your practice. Let me see, I have it here. It's very simple. It used to call, when I started using it, it was called Pomodoro Timer, and now it's called the Focus Timer. Let me see if I have it here. Oh, did I delete it? Yeah, I must have deleted it. Well, anyway, I'll put it in. It's called the Focus Timer. And what it does, and there are plenty of those online, but I come across it a few years ago, and I was using it a lot. Lately, I haven't used it. It works mostly on it works on iPhone and with Apple things, but there are plenty of those similar to that. So what it does, it basically prompts you to have sessions. You can program it to remind you to take breaks, because that is my problem. I always forget to take breaks, and I think I if I'm really into my practice, I tend to practice way too long, and then I get too tired. And so my productivity suffers that way. When I remember to take breaks, I can actually practice more time, even though I practice less at once. And so this focus timer, what it does, it will remind you to take a break, and you can set it to take a break maybe every 30 minutes. But the coolest part about it is that it will actually keep track of by days of how many times you, how many hours, like how much time you practice, and also how many sessions of a timer you practice, but also by tasks. So when you start a practice session, you could enter, for example, scales. Every day you practice scales, you could maybe start a session that says scales. And then when you go to, after a break, if you need to practice your concerto, you name it concerto. And then after that, when you go into the app, into the calendar, into the graphs, it'll actually show you how many minutes or hours you practiced your scales this week, how many minutes or hours you practiced your concerto. And I love doing that because I love timing and seeing how many sessions it took me, for example, to memorize a certain concerto or a certain piece. So yeah, that is great, great tip. Thank you, Maria, for keeping a planner. And if you're one of those persons who does that, that's great. My daughter does it, the cellist. But if you're not, you could use a focus timer because it basically does it for you. Okay, awesome. So next, let's see what we have next in Fiorillo. So I know that if you are from the Valley, then the region excerpts for Fiorillo, both for region 15 and 28, actually include those passages that I mentioned. So the region 15 will have the passage in the measure 13, and the region 28, I think, has the one later on, that happens later on. So definitely practice your scales and do that. Now, what about, so I want to give you another tip, and that has to do with bow distribution. Making sure that you have enough bow on the passages when you have to play a lot of notes on that passage. For example, measure 15, you have, and I'm going to turn on the 44, my tonal energy tuner to 44. I have it right there. And I actually have it on, she's subdivided into eighth notes, right? So that is the slowest tempo that they want. So, and I'm going to play for you measure 15. Right? So that's a lot of notes to fit. And it's not a super slow tempo, but it's challenging enough. So how do you do this? How do you make sure that you don't run out of bow? And most important, to feel comfortable. Well, I like to visualize on the bow where is time for every finger to fall down on the string. So one of my students, she calls it mapping out your left hand on the bow. So I like that term. She used it when I tried to explain to her, and I use it now. Mapping it out. So mapping your left hand on your bow. The way it works, when you produce a sound, when you drop the bow on the string, you see there's that cross we talked about, that you can see where the bow touches the string. You get a hair and the string create kind of a cross shape. So this is that point of a string that is actually making a sound at this point on the bow. And what I do, I like to actually, when I play slow things, I like to watch my bow. And by watching my bow, what I mean is watching that particular spot, that cross, because it's moving, because your bow is moving constantly. So mentally, the mental trick is to expect the sound the minute that cross happens. So don't think, well, I'm going to just try it and wait, and then I'm going to produce a good sound. No, because you can't afford to do that at this slow tempo, because you lose a lot of bow. So number one, you watch that cross, and then what you're going to do, you're going to imagine on the bow, exactly, you will plan out where on the bow you're going to drop your fingers. And when you do it that way, it's extremely easy. And so you basically visualize virtually think of the string connecting your finger all the way to the bow, like a coordinates. And that, so you know your A flat has to drop here, B natural here, D will be here, F will be here, and so forth. So the more visual it is for you on the bow, the easier it will be for your body to figure out what bow speed you have to use. And it's amazing. It works so good. It's much faster than trying to do anything else, I promise, if you try it. So one of the things you could do, you could always put mark your bow if you're having trouble with the long notes and maybe you're running out of bow, or maybe sometimes you're saving the bow for too long and not using the whole bow. You can mark. So think of, if you look at the hair, right, because the hair of the bow, that's the part that actually produces the sound. And so you can actually use little tiny stickers. Make sure put it on this side so you can see as you're playing, just to mark the parts of the bow. Even just if you mark the middle of the bow for yourself, it'll make it so much easier. And then look at how many beats each stroke has. For example, you start with a very long note. So the first bow, the first down bow has 6 beats, right? Even though it looks like it has only 3 notes, but it actually has 6 beats. So once you hear how long the beats are, of course, 6 beats, you have to plan enough. So if you know that this is your middle, so you know that maybe you want to be right past the middle on the 5th beat so that the 6th has a little bit more room, right? So, and then you just do it. So you... You see, I was technically watching my bow and I was very aware of where the middle of the bow was. And so that helped me to plan out the bow distribution on this first measure, which would be probably the hardest. As far as crescendo and diminuendo go, make sure that even though it starts on the piano, you really want to avoid being too far away from the bridge. And I think I mentioned that last time, because the string is much softer. The closer the more away you are from the bridge, the softer the string is. And so you run the risk of getting that crack in the string, in that sound, that scratchy sound. If you get a little bit nervous during your audition, or the bow speed varies too much, and all of a sudden you hear that that scratch. Now, when you play really close to the bridge, there's less risk of that because the string is much tighter by the bridge. So anytime you are playing something like that, and especially if it's in a stressful situation, if you're performing it or you're recording for an audition, it's really much safer to try and stay as close to the bridge as you can. Now, it depends on your instrument and on your bow and on your overall technique, how close you can get to the bridge and still have a nice sound. So this is up to you. But that's the artistic challenge, right? That's the beauty of being an artist. You have to figure it out for yourself. But this is generally the best insurance policy you can have. Okay, we got a new question. Hi, Joshua Garza. Joshua is asking, would you necessarily say that using a metronome every day, every time you practice on every piece, etc., cause any bad habits? Ooh, wow, that's a profound question. Awesome question, actually. I definitely would not use metronome on everything. I would die. I would go crazy. But metronome, number one, you have to learn how to use it correctly. And that is the most important thing, that you know how to use it correctly. But going back to your question, and we can talk about that a little bit, but no, I definitely don't use it always everywhere. Now, it would be a fun challenge, if you struggle with rhythms, with keeping a steady beat. If you struggle with that a lot, and which we all do naturally, want to speed up or slow down, that's just human nature. It is a great discipline. It's just fantastic exercise. But and you could give yourself a challenge, maybe say, I really want to nail that down, that rhythm, that steady rhythm thing. And maybe 1 week I will play everything and anything I play with a metronome. That would be kind of a fun challenge, but it would be like extraordinary thing that you would do maybe once in a lifetime or once a month, maybe. But I definitely would not using every day. That's fine on something. That's totally fine. In fact, scales, great thing to do that. A scale practice, I actually recommend to practice your scales with a metronome, especially if you do acceleration challenge. Yes, you could definitely do every day. That would be great. But every time you practice and every piece, definitely I wouldn't. For me, I know it would drive me nuts. I would get bored and I would not even want to practice. And then there's some pieces that completely would sound really weird if you really play them metronomically. Now, if we're talking specifically right now, you're getting ready for All-State. Again, I talked about it in our very first live. I think you can use metronome as many times as you want when you practice these etudes, because you are getting ready for an orchestra audition and not a concert. If that's all you're getting used to, getting ready, and not a concert performance of either of those etudes, then it won't hurt using a metronome as long as you are listening to it and you're really following it, right? Because that's what the person who is listening to your audition, that's one of the first things they're going to pay attention to, is whether you can keep a steady beat, whether all your rhythms are executed correctly. That is huge. And there's nothing wrong with using a metronome every time you practice. Now, if you're going to practice, for example, when you play through, but if you're practicing for intonation, again, the metronome will drive you nuts because you have to stop and go, right? So definitely, if you're practicing for intonation, I would not practice with the metronome. If you're trying to figure out how to do a certain articulation in a certain place, definitely you have to turn it off, because in all of those cases, you will have a lot of stops and goes, right? And in that case, metronome is absolutely useless, right? But when you've nailed, when you more or less have a chunk of a piece that you can play through without any major hiccups, then metronome can be very, very helpful in those cases. And what I do, actually, I love using tallies. I remember one time I had to learn, I was excited because I was performing a Khachaturian violin concerto with an orchestra, and I was super, super stoked, but I only had 1 month to learn the whole concerto, and it's one of the longest, actually. If you've never heard it, oh my goodness, go and listen to it. It's one of the prettiest concertos ever. And so I was excited. I had a phenomenal orchestra to play it with, but I had only 1 month to learn it from scratch. I never played it, and to memorize it. And it's extremely repetitive. And so what I did tallies. I would learn a chunk of a movement, and to make sure that I really learned it well enough, I would turn on the metronome at a speed I would want to play when I would play with the orchestra, and then I would play through and tally, do tallies in my music. I still have it in my iPad. And then I want to do, like, at least be able to do 5 times in a row without any major mishaps, and where I can keep up with the metronome. And I love doing that with metronome, because it tells you if you don't know it very well, and if you stop, then you're not following the metronome anymore. That means you don't know it that well, right? You need some extra time for thinking, and that's not good. So yeah, I love using metronome like that, and tally up when I know something to see whether I know it well or not. Yeah, but definitely don't do it. I mean, I couldn't do it for everything. And then also, if you are playing a piece, sometimes it really doesn't sound good if you play too metronomically. For example, if you use ties, that famous would use metronome at the beginning when I'm learning. So it will help my bow distribution. It will help me to make sure that I am starting every next note in the right place on the bow, that my body will, by hearing this very clear beat in the metronome, my body will know what bow speed to take and where. And I want to make sure when I'm learning that I count out all the rhythms correctly. But once I learn that, I don't want to play metronomically because it will be very boring. And when you turn off the metronome, once you know your rhythms really well, then you can have a little bit of freedom. But because you've played enough with the metronome now, you have that inner feeling of the beats, and so you're not going to do anything super weird, right? But you definitely don't want to play something like this very, very exactly as a metronome, because then it will sound a little bit robotic. Does that make sense? Okay, great. And actually, one of my professors that I studied with, she's a fantastic violinist. She absolutely hates metronomes. She would like, I remember we had a quartet coaching with her, and that was the first time, and I asked my colleagues, that was back when I was a student getting my doctorate. Maybe we should play for her with a metronome, and they were, no, she's gonna throw that metronome away. So anyway, Joshua Garza. So like if you're preparing for any competition like region or all state, it's okay to use a metronome, because I'm just generally speaking for people that are not as prepared as others or are having troubles with faster pieces and stuff like that. Yeah, totally. It depends on your goal. But I would still say, obviously, you have to have a discernment, right? You have to decide why you're turning on your metronome. So as I said, if you're turning on your metronome, obviously for a reason of, so there's different ways. For example, you can play slowly with a metronome for just to make sure that you figure out exactly how the rhythms are working in a particular measure, right? Or in a particular place apart. And then in that case, you're just using metronome to help you count all the rhythms correctly. And what you want to make sure that you're fitting all the rhythms within the beats, right? Because I've seen a lot of students who will turn on the metronome and then they're completely off, and it's going, but they're not even paying attention to it. So obviously that was not going to help you. Yes. Then you can also use metronome to help you, and that's one of my favorite ways. For example, in the faster etude like Rodé, you can, once you kind of know how to execute all of the rhythms properly, you can pick out, like take a couple of lines of whatever cut you're preparing and find a speed on the metronome that you're comfortable with and try playing through that at that speed with the metronome and making sure that you're nailing on all the rhythms correctly and you don't have any major mishaps through. And tally it out, like use tallies like I do, and see if you can do it 5 times at that tempo. Once you feel like super confident, and it can be as slow as you want. Once you feel like super confident at that tempo, then that's when the fun part is. You raise just a couple of notches, not too much, just enough to make you work a little bit harder, right? And then you play at that tempo until you feel very comfortable. Then you see if you can do it 5 times in a row. Once you can do it 5 times in a row in the new tempo, then you get a couple of notches up, and then you write down, you take a note of where you've finished today, and then tomorrow you start a little bit lower and then keep building up. You will be amazed at how much faster you'll be able to play pretty soon. It's amazing, that really slow build up. So that is also an amazing way to use metronome. I love it. In fact, all of the fast things that I play, anytime when I start out and I feel like, oh my goodness, this is so fast, how am I ever going to get to that tempo? That's what I do. But you have to, so number one, you can use it to just figure out the rhythms. The second one, you can help yourself build up to the speed. And of course, the third one is once you're up to speed you want, you can help yourself to stay at that speed. But again, you make sure that you're using the metronome correctly. And before, if you set it, what I love about metronomes now, back when I was your age, guys, I had this pre-flood technology, that little thing, that goes conk, 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 and there's nothing else you could do basically. And then they would go out of shape so quickly. After like using it for a couple of months, they were completely like off. So now not only they're very, very precise, but you have this feature on most of the metronome where you can make the highlight the beat, a certain beat, for like the first beat. That is so helpful, because if for example, you're playing rotates 4 beats per measure, right? If you highlight the first beat, then make sure you pay attention that it always lines up with your first beat, because sometimes you might count it wrong, and maybe you were a beat too short or a beat too long, ended up in some measures. Then it'll let you know, you will be able to see that if your first beat on the metronome is not lining up with the first beat that you're playing, that means you've missed somewhere. So yeah, that's another great way to use metronome. I love using metronome for technical practice. Yes, definitely. And especially for excerpts. For your excerpts, it's great. Again, you want rhythmic precision is a really top thing that on the list of whoever is going to listen to your audition. So yeah, great. I'm glad. I hope you're using metronome, Joshua, but definitely don't use it all the time, because it'll drive you nuts. I mean, sometimes give yourself a break, right? What else? Intonation. For intonation, so if you nail, guys, literally, if you nail intonation and rhythm correctly, you're already way ahead of a lot of people. So don't, like, when you start practicing, figure out for yourselves, divide and conquer, right? So you can use part of your practice, just concentrate on the rhythms. Part of your practice, just concentrate on the intonation. And then, of course, rodé, we talked about. In rodé, it's very important to practice different types of articulations, and you can do that on your scales. And then in fiorillo, you can definitely practice long tones, and you could do that for the beginning. So again, as I always say, divide and conquer. So the very beginning of the fiorillo, you have 2 measures that are on, actually 3 measures that are all on D string. Well, the hardest, I think, is the first 2 measures, right? Because you have first and 1.5 measures, because you have the longest note to hold. So instead of playing with notes, what you could do, you could just play that on D string. So here's, I'll put it in just beats, quarters. So here's, this one is beat equals 44, right? I mean, it's 1, a quarter equals 44 beats per measure. So my first bow has to be 6 beats. It's all on the same string, on D string. And I have to make a crescendo toward the 3rd beat, right? Because that's the middle of the first measure. Then diminuendo toward the 4th beat. And then the next 2 beats that I'm going to have are going to have to be piano. So you can practice all that on just open string. And when you do, you can hold your violin here, so you will be less tired. And just go. Ready, go. See, it's going to be much easier to do it on the open string than try to do with the notes. And what you can do even more, I'm going to make it harder on myself. So you see 44? Remember I told you to start slower on the fast etude and build up? I'm going to actually go on this one. I'm going to go slower than 44. Let's see if I can do it on, I'm going to go to 30. See if I can make it on 30. Ready? All right. So this is 1 beat equals 30. You see how much slower it is? So I'm going to have to hold for 6 beats at 30. Let's see if I can do it. If I can do it at 30, 44 will be a breathe, right? Ready? Go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh yeah, I still have a bow to spare, so definitely. You see what I'm doing? I can even go slower if I want to. So that's how you use metronome for fiorillo, for example. So, okay, Joshua Garza, troubles with faster pieces and stuff like that. Great, thanks for all help. You are so welcome, guys. It looks like we're kind of wrapping up with our live. I want to let you know that the next Saturday, I'm planning to do a YouTube live again. That will be the last one, because after that, I'm leaving for Italy. I'm going to be teaching and performing at this really fun festival in Italy. And you know, now YouTube changed things, and now if you have a channel that has less than 1,000 subscribers, you can't really do a live unless you have your computer, you know, your laptop or something. And I'm not taking my laptop. So I want to let you know that next week we're still having a YouTube live, just like today. But after that, that will be my last on YouTube. After that, I will be in Italy, and I will be doing lives on Instagram. I just discovered you could do it on Instagram. I didn't know that. So if I'll post my Instagram name. It also pops up on my Allstate Etude videos. So if you want to follow me on Instagram this way, I will try to continue those, God willing, the Wi-Fi will work and everything. And I will definitely be posting some tips. I'm thinking of some things, fun things to post weekly, just to kind of help you during that Allstate season. And of course, as always, I highly recommend our boot camp, our 5-week boot camp program. If you want to check it out, let me know. I will also be in Harlingen. Yes, in Harlingen. It's July 2nd and 3rd. I will be there. I think I'm teaching from 1 to 2 p.m. or from 2 to 3 p.m. So I will be for 2 days. So I'm looking forward to seeing, I hope Crafty Games 27, I hope you'll be there, because you were asking me about it earlier. And I'm really, really excited about this. If you guys are in Harlingen District, I hope you attend, because we'll have a lot of fun. Again, thank you everyone for joining me today. I had enormous fun answering your questions. Again, even after, you know, if you wanna, before we, you know, end the stream, if you wanna post any of your favorite gadgets or apps, that's great. And also send me a comment. I know you can't comment post live stream, I think, but you could comment on my videos. If you want me to go over any other apps or gadget and review them, I would be very happy to do so. All right, we'll have a wonderful weekend, and I hope I see you next week. Bye.